Hey everybody, welcome back. Hollywood Pizza here, and I'm going to be joined today by HearSayTTV, and we're going to talk to you about the metagame breakdown from our event March 13th, the Slice of Alchemy. Don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Hey Hearsay, how's it going?
Hey, what's going on, Pizza? What's going on? Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. Let's go and talk about the metagame here, Slice of Alchemy. What was there anything in particular that uh stuck out to you?
Yeah, like I honestly did not. I kind of figured that we would have the Grixis, a lot of Grixis decks, seeing as the Magic tournament was happening there over the weekend, and with Jim Davis going 15-0, obviously we're gonna see some of that. But I'm actually rather impressed of the Rakdos Sacrifice list that has made it into our top eight.
Yeah, it was actually pretty interesting that there was like a mirror match at the end there of like pretty much a deck no one would have even thought to have been in the finals, really, I think, right? Kind of like
Yeah, it was just
yeah.
like it's kind of like a back and forth of just haymaker after haymaker. Like I got my card, you got yours. All right, who's gonna get there first? Like it's just it felt like not like like an hourglass, and you only had so much time to figure out your combo and try to get there. It was an exciting like to watch.
Yeah, I'm like looking at the metagame here and I feel like there was a pretty good mix of decks. There was definitely one deck in particular I think that showed up more than all the other decks, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. Grixis Midrange being 10 decks out of most of the tournament. Then the next one following the Rakdos Sacrifice. Then we had some Mono White Aggro and Gruul Werewolves. It was some pretty impressive gameplay that we've seen over the course of the top eight and even over the tournament itself.
Yeah, the mono red deck is well there. Bant mid range, Mardu mid range. Uh, the deck that I think is interesting that we didn't really get too much of a show from, which isn't too surprising considering that you can imagine that by now there might be like more of an answer to it, is runes, which is showing up here with only 2 copies, and the record of the deck was also not that great at 3 and 5.
hmm Yeah, like it was. I thought that was really weird, seeing as Runes was terrorizing the ladder and the tournament before for the better part of a week, and now it's just it being a deck that's not even existent. Basically, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how like quickly it kind of fell off to a certain degree. I agree with you with what we talked about all screen, which is that it's still a tier 1 deck, but it's not necessarily like the best deck as it like kind of just came out of nowhere the
hmm
last weekend. It definitely had its show.
Yeah, I think it definitely had its breakout weekend. One of like I said to you there off stream as well, was it only runs 15 creatures. So if you find a way that you can actually remove those creatures, then the deck's not really doing anything. Or if you board wipe them or get rid of the graveyard so that the forge champion actually can't grab a rune out of the graveyard, you're usually laughing. And the deck only really needs 2 creatures to really kill you. And if you can just keep those creatures in control, then you're laughing.
Yeah, pretty much removal and graveyard hate are the things that hurt that deck pretty easily. And there's quite a few cards right now that essentially can do all that at once, and cards like Farewell, uh
Go blank.
yeah, Go Blank, even a cards like Vanishing Verse. I mean, Vanishing Verse, yeah, it gets rid of one thing, but if you're exiling like their Kami, I mean, it's not coming back, right?
And a lot of the I'm pretty sure a lot of the black decks anyways were running Raven Fieldman, which is a 1 mana spell, kill everything that was in the runes deck. It dealt with Hinata pretty well. It dealt with mono white, obviously. It was just a really great card.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that card in the sideboard earlier of a deck list, and I was like, man, this card hits a lot of things. You're right. Like being able to hit Hinata for 1 mana is really good, considering that most of the time that deck is already being a lot more efficient than you. So I mean, either way, the card is going to cost 2 mana, but it's a lot better than, let's say, like 3 mana of like a Infernal Grasp, and then you lose 2 life, or
Hmm.
you're still spending 3 and it just gets countered anyways, right? So I feel like if I'm at least going to have one of my spells get countered, I'd rather have the cheapest spell get countered, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. Let's have a look at some of these deck lists that we had in the top 8.
Yeah, definitely. Let's break down some of this top 8 here once we've already looked here at the percentage of all the decks that have shown up. So it's quite an interesting show. Like you said earlier, Grixis, Rakdos, Mono White, Gruul, Red, Bant, Mardu, Rune, Azorius, Hinata, Mill, and Rakdos. Midrange are the decks that essentially you got to see 2 or more of, and then a splashing of some other interesting decks there.
Hmm.
So in 8th place here, we have Sarawak. Sorry if I say that wrong, but they played Orzhov Ventures to a 4-2 record here.
Which was the that Orzhov list is the list that Eli Cassis was playing there over the weekend and ended up winning the tournament.
Yeah, this deck list is solid. I mean, if anything, this was the breakout deck of this weekend, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would definitely, I'd agree. It just has that grindy, like it can be very aggressive if you're not dealing with the creatures, but it can have that grindy where it just brings things back or it just gives extra value off going into the dungeons. And like, who would have thought that after Crimson Vow came out and all that stuff that we're still talking about venturing into dungeons? Like, no one, everyone, like it's always a meme at first, and then all of a sudden there's always a breakout deck later in the year, and you're like, oh, dungeons is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that's the best thing about Alchemy, right? Is that, you know, not only are they toning down the power level of decks and cards that may be kind of like too good for the format, but they're also boosting other cards that potentially could make an otherwise unplayable mechanic kind of like, let's say, like a more like a limited type mechanic like Venture was, and turn into something that is more constructed worthy. And I mean, this is a deck that did great during the PT. I mean, it won, and even, you know, this player here playing this in our event, they ended up top 8ing with the deck. I mean, if there were more people playing the deck, it would have had a pretty high win percentage, I would believe,
Hmm.
right? Just because of how, just one person, and even, in a high level tournament like the PT, like the set championship, they're taking down the whole event with it. I mean, that already shows the power of like where some of the buffs are, right?
Hmm. And there was only that one list too in the tournament. There was only that one list playing Orza Venture out of the whole tournament, and they went 4-2. Like if there had been more people playing it, we probably would have seen more decks, and maybe would have seen this list win instead of the Rakdos Sacrifice.
Definitely. Now, there is one thing here. Let me take a look. So, it does look like this deck list as well is playing the Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
Hmm.
So, this is one of the cards that was also a big breakout of the weekend. Um, just a fantastic card here. Just whenever it comes in, it makes a creature. Whenever that creature attacks, it makes a treasure token. So you get some value off of the card attacking. Even just once, even if, like, let's say it dies, it still could ramp you in the same turn. The second part of the saga, you kind of just like get a redraw, like a seasoned Pyromancer. I've had seen a few posts recently that talk about replacing this essentially with seasoned Pyromancer, and I think that that's actually kind of interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of weird that the list is basically Orza, but it does splash the red for the Fable, and that once it gets to that third chapter, it can be pretty brutal.
Yeah, that third chapter, they make a token. Excuse me. Essentially, the saga flips, and it comes in as a Kiki Jiki. Essentially, it's a 3 mana
Hmm.
2/2, but you can pay 1 and tap it to make a copy of any non-legendary creature on the battlefield.
Yeah, so it just ends up being like a really good value engine for them from, and it gives it haste.
Yeah, it
So
gives it
paying
haste.
one, make it copy. So like I think Grixis was using it to copy the City Stalker. What's that? What's the card? The card is it's the City Stalker that makes you discard your biggest card, your
City
biggest CMC
Soccer
card.
Connoisseur.
Connoisseur, yes. And then in the Grixis list, they were using it for the Town Razor Tyrant and also the City Stalker.
Yeah, on
So by
stream
you
even.
like just always discarding a card and just not being able to really control those creatures, it can get out of hand.
Yeah, on stream, there was a point where one of the players was blinking, or excuse me, making copies of the Tyrant, and they got each one of their opponent's land with the Tyrant. So they were pretty much, on a clock. I mean, you don't have an answer to that. Those are your lands, right?
Yeah.
Like you gotta sacrifice all your lands. Like all your resources are gone, right? Like it's a really crazy card that I don't even think that you and me on the set review
No, I don't. I think
like
we kind of pass it off because we assume that it's like, okay, cool. It makes a body. Then the next turn you can kind of filter through. And the next
a
turn
little bit too
you get a
slow.
Kiki Jiki, but it's slow. I was like, even
Yeah.
like in my eyes, I was like, it's slow.
But it's technically the same turn as you would get a Kiki Jiki, it just doesn't have haste, right? That's
Yeah.
like the difference. Like it's turn 5, it flips into it, but you're not able to use it right away.
Hmm.
I think maybe we like undervalued the looting effect of it
The looting, and I
potentially.
think the just honestly the cards that we have in standard and alchemy right now, being able to copy your City Stalker or the Town Razor Tyrant, or even copying a card like the Graveyard Trespasser, being able to get a 3/3 attacker down that has ward that when it attacks is going to exile a card out of the yard. Like even that card, it can be pretty backbreaking when you're just trying to stay alive, and all of a sudden like your opponent just has continually having gas. And in alchemy, what I've seen on over across of all the tournaments was copying the Blood Artist. And then your Blood Artist has a tons of triggers going along with Meat Hook Massacres. You can just get really outvalued really, really quickly.
Yeah, totally. Um, let's go ahead and move to our 7th place deck here. Go ahead with mono red aggro. Now, this is alchemy, so mono red is a little bit more popular, but usually hearsay when I think of mono red, wouldn't you say it's more of the dragon variety?
Yeah, like when I think mono red, I think the dragon whelp, but that's already obviously got its nerf. And even when I think of mono red, I think of Eldraine mono red and how El Busto that deck was, and it just doesn't have the same power. But this mono red list did have a showing out, and it did really well over the course of the tournament, going 4-2.
Yeah, I've definitely lost to decks like this on the ladder. This one isn't as like burn based, but it's pretty much just playing all the best red cards you could play on creatures, playing, 3 of most of the efficient burn spells, 4 of Ignis Inspirations to kind of help you get some more card advantage in the late game. The Kumano faces because Kakazan is a great addition, which to me I was like, oh yeah, this is just a great, limited red card, but apparently it's more than that here. Say it's definitely
Hmm.
showing us quite a lot here recently. And on top of that, there are some other decks in the metagame itself that are using that card in standard even.
Yeah, and like especially in the sideboard here with the mono red list, the conductive current is actually a pretty good board wipe in alchemy. Like it's a kind of essentially like an anger of the gods. Like kind of like get me out of jail right now, and then it giving one of your spells in your hand, it does 2 extra damage. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's a really powerful card. It's great in that white matchup, which could be difficult because of cards like Thalia, anything like that, like the Redains that makes them your maybe 4 mana spells cost more. Like
Hmm.
I think that this deck is really good against anything blue based. I feel like anything that might have a little bit more of like a slower time getting started, but
Hmm.
even against some of the aggro decks, I think that as long as most of the creatures are within that burn range of the deck, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. Most red decks usually they start to have a problem whenever things start to get to that 4 toughness. So maybe a deck like werewolves or anything like that that might give this deck more of a problem because that 4 toughness or higher starts to become a real thing.
Yeah, and that's like another thing too. Like with the white decks, you know that the butt is small. Same as the black decks too, that really grind you out with using cards like Blood on the Snow and bringing things back as you kill them. Um, the Kumano was actually like when it flips into its creature, anything that dies goes to exile. So it really helps against that black matchup as well.
Yeah, I think that this deck is pretty much the real deal. We just don't see it too much because it doesn't. There haven't really been too many alchemy events outside of the ones that we usually have, but
Hmm.
like this isn't really like a deck that shows up too often, or if it does, it doesn't usually get top 8. So
Yeah,
definitely
it's
agree
gonna
to
be
what you said
exciting to
earlier. It's
see
a
going
breakout.
forward for sure.
Yeah, definitely like more of a breakout for this deck. So
Hmm.
go ahead and move over here to our 6th place deck. Grixis Midrange. I believe this was the deck that Jim Davis was playing.
Hmm.
You want to break this deck down a little bit more for us here?
Oh yeah, for sure. So this list is actually like I was super surprised in this list because this list can really also grind you out. It has so much card advantage. And when I first read Kaido, I didn't think that this was a great planeswalker. Even it being at 3 mana, I just thought though it was really kind of undervalued me because like it comes with 3 loyalty. Once it's activated, you can kind of kill it whenever, and like it's only really like it's looting. It can create a 1/1, but like I was like, oh, like it's a 1/1 that can't block that dies to everything. Like this, it doesn't pass the shock testament. So I just rated it very low. But in this list, it is absolutely unstoppable. When you see Kaido after Kaido after Kaido, you just get buried underneath the card advantage that it does provide. And it protects itself. At the end of your turn, it's going to phase out. So you get to use it, then it protects itself for a turn, and it's left with either you have to draw a card, discard a card, or you left the body. And now it's gone until your next turn. Um, Soren the Mirthless, obviously, we already know that's a great planeswalker. It creates a 2/3 body. It's a flyer, lifelink, and it's also a potential card draw engine for you. Sometimes you can just get lands off it and don't take any damage, and sometimes you'll take a little bit of damage, or sometimes you'll take a lot of damage, but it gives you a card if you want it, or lets you know what's on the top of your deck. Again, with the City Stalker, great card. The Blood Tithe Harvester, we've already seen over the course of the tournament how good this card actually is. Being able to remove a gold spend dragon without targeting it, mind you, now in Alchemy, gold spend the spell target doesn't work the way that it used to in Standard. But even still, getting rid of that treasure and that attacker is really, really good. The Rahilda is also really, really good. It being a 2/2 first strike when it comes down, and then it comes a double strike when it comes down onto nighttime. It's a powerhouse of a card. Then you have your Trespasser that just prevents or gives you more advantage, being able to exile cards of the graveyard, do incremental damage. Also, it's a life gain, and it's a body that like requires a 2-for-1. You have to get in order to get rid of it. You have to get rid of a card in your hand. So if you're down like in a control matchup, if you're down to a 1 card in your hand, you just can't get rid of it. It's just there and you're stuck. The Town Raiser is just so good because there's so many lists that are not running as many basics as they should. So the Town Raiser really punishes a lot of these greedy deck lists that play the dual lands and play the pathways. And Town Raiser Tyrant capitalizes on that, being, yep, you can take 2 damage as long as it stays around, you're taking 2 damage. And then again with the Fable Mirror Breaker, being able to obviously get the Geeky Jeeky and copy the Town Raiser or copy the City Stalker or even copy the Blood Tithe is really good. Like that just becomes like this whole deck list is an absolute advantage on your side as long as you're getting cards, you're removing things, you're creating like every body as a threat where you almost need a board wipe almost every single turn to make sure that they don't have the creatures to copy or to have more value on you. For the package that have as and spells, having duress in main deck is just so good. Being able to look at a Jeskai's hand and say, "Yep, get rid. I see that you kept 2 lands and an expressive. Get rid of the expressive iteration. Now you're stuck on lands," kind of thing. The power word kill is really, really good as well. Yes, there's some dragons around, but it's still a good removal. It doesn't hit everything, obviously, but it's still a good removal spell. A braid, we already know how good a braid is. The flame blast bolt or blessed bolt, still really good. It being a 2-mana shock towards a creature or a planeswalker and exiling if it dies is just really, really good. The Voltage Surge, we've already know how good this card is. We've seen it in our finals. This card can be an absolute menace as removal, and I really, really enjoy it. Then our lands are just your same typical Grixis lands. You're going to have all the pathways. You have your Haunted Ridge, your Storm Coast. You're obviously going to have your creature lands, that being in the Hive and the Den of the Bugbear. The sideboard is what's really, really interesting. There's 3 Meteoric Masters. Obviously, if you notice that your opponent's going wide, you're going to clear the board out, gain some life, get some more incremental damage on that side. 2 more duress, because you're going in control match. You need to be able to get in their hand and take away those cards. It's going to provide advantage for them. The Mind Flare, I think, is really cool. Being able to take someone's creature, always really powerful. The Knockout Scavenger enables you to have a good blocker and also gain a little bit of life. The Staple Stroke, what's really, really cool is obviously the person coming in here. And 6th place, we're looking at Sir Hamilton's list here. There's 2 of Annul, which is counter. It's 1 mana, counter a artifact and or enchantment. That is a sign of they know what they're going into, being runes. But that being said, we've only seen 2 lists, so almost this card almost became unplayable because there's only 2 runes lists. Now, mind you, there's.
I would say it's good in the mirror, though, right? Like, I would say that Annul is actually good because you can counter the Fable. Which is kind of weird because you wouldn't expect it to do that, right? Like, that's not what it... You're 100% right on what Annul is here to do. But it's kind of weird that you end up playing this mini game knowing that there's going to be other Grixis decks and you can kind of counter that, right? Isn't that kind of weird?
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of those like, it was like a CE card saying, like, yeah, it's bad, but it's good when it's good, you know? Like, obviously, Annul's a dead card when it comes to mono white or the Rakdos Sacrifice list. Well, I guess it wouldn't be actually not. I should let me correct myself, because you can counter the Anvil. Yeah, but it's definitely a sneaky card.
Yeah,
sneaky card to have in your sideboard. But like overall, like this list was Jim Davis's list that went 15-0. Like went 7-0 the first day, went 8-0 the second day. And then continued into being in the top 8 into the final day. The list obviously has game. It just, Sir Hamilton definitely placed in the top 8, but just fell a little bit short.
All right, let's get right into our 5th place deck here, which is one of my favorites. We have Gruul Werewolves. This deck is great. For creatures, we got Werewolf Pack Leaders, we have Reckless Storm Seekers, Town Razor Tyrants, Tenacious Pups. We got 3 Tovolars, 3 Helena and Elena partners, 3 Rahilda, 1 Outland Liberator main, which I think that this is another card that you almost could main more than one of here. 3 Ranger Class, 2 Thunder Rebuke, 2 Shadow Skull Smashing, a Snakeskin Veil, a Flame Blessed Bolt, and an Inscription of Abundance for our spells. For lands, we got Pathways, Rockfall Veil, Lair of the Hydra, Forsaken Crossroads, and I'm actually, in all honesty, I'm really surprised that we're only seeing like 1 Boseiju.
Man, I really don't understand that. Yeah, Boseiju is it's a great land, and this land is being used across all formats, not just alchemy, not just standard, but it's in historic, it's in legacy, it's in modern. Like, this card is a host. It being able to get rid of a non-basic land, an enchantment, or an artifact out of the I guess like the con is that they go get a land. Like I said, there's a lot of lists out there that aren't running a lot of basic lands. So by going, yeah, Bejeju, that creature land that's giving me issues, or grab the enchantment that's giving me an issue, like Meat Hook Massacre. Like I really feel like this is like a 2 or 3 of in any list, just because yeah, you know it's a legendary land, but one is a land and 2 of them are spells, or you can use the land, use the mana, play the next one, and like it kind of you know what I mean. Like I just think like it definitely should be more than just a one of.
Agreed. For the sideboard, we have a couple more Thunder Rebukes, 2 Arlands, 2 Flame Blessed Bolt, a couple of Blight Blades, 2 Snakeskin Veil, 2 more Outland Liberators, great card, 1 Volatile Arsonist, a Tangle Trap, and an Avabrook Caretaker, another card I'm a huge fan of. Avabrook Caretaker can just, that card
It
just
can
runs
finish
away
it.
with games.
Yeah. It's like if that comes down, you can't answer it. The game's almost is pretty well over. One thing that I'm really interested that a lot of these Gruul Werewolves lists don't run is the Invigorated Hot Spring. Now, hear me out. Right? It's a 3 mana enchantment, 1 in Gruul, that comes with 4 counters on it, and you can give that counter to a creature that comes in. Any creature that is modified uh, gets is given haste. Now the Tenacious Pup gives 3 different counters. It gives a Vigilance, Trample, and a counter to the next creature you bring in. So say you go Tenacious Pup, then the next one you give whatever creature you're going to cast out, it's going to get all those counters. And say even if you had like a Hot Springs out, it gives it haste when it comes on immediately. It's going to be able to power up Helena. It's going to be able to power up Rahilda. It's gonna you can give haste to your town resident and make it a 5/5. I just think like the hot spring definitely should, I feel like should see in more of these Gruul lists.
Yeah, there's definitely room for innovation in a lot of these lists. I know that there's a lot of different versions of werewolves. Werewolves is definitely, I think, I don't know. To me, even though we didn't see too much of a crazy showing from it, I think that this deck is like top 3 decks for me in Alchemy.
Yeah, it can
Honestly,
be
like it's
very
a
aggressive very
strong
quickly.
deck. Yeah, it's a some of the like there's a lot of draws in this deck that are just unbeatable.
Yeah.
It's like the new mono green pretty much, where you're playing a lot of like better for rate creatures. So, you snowball pretty quick when your opponents either don't have the same size threats or don't have answers to what you're doing. Like maybe their answers don't line up correctly. So this deck
Hmm.
definitely can get you by surprise, and it's a known deck as well. So definitely something that you're gonna have to look forward to playing against here in Alchemy. Go and move up to our next deck list here. We're actually gonna go over 2 decks at the same time. It's gonna be our 4th and 3rd place deck list here. So we have mono white aggro in 4th and mono white aggro in 3rd. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Kind of pretty close to your stock deck list. Wouldn't you say there's like 1 or 2
Yeah,
differences?
like this. I don't really think there's too much of a difference between the two lists. Like mono white is mono white. Like it's going to be an aggressive deck. It's mono white's probably one of the best on curve decks out there because you can just go turn 1 and a turn 2 and a turn 3 and a turn 4, and you're just not only you adding pressure, you're adding stacks pieces like Thalia and Redain, or looking in the opponent's hand with the spellbinders, and then the aspirant's going to power them up. It just can get out of hand really, really quickly. And even the Skycliff apparitions, being able to remove a threat from the other side, not even just a threat, but like a permanent from 4 CMC or less. Mono white can be really hard to deal with if you're just not paying attention to their board or being able to clear it. You just get bodied under the amount of pressure and the good curve it has.
Yeah, that's I think the best thing that I remember when Alchemy first came out that you told me was, in Alchemy, every card has to be like a bomb, but it also has to be like on curve. Like every card, like you have to curve out 1, 2, 3, 4. Like you have to be using your mana every turn, putting threats down every turn. You have to be doing something that, is gonna end the game almost. You know, like putting your opponent in a bad position very quick.
Yeah, like if
And
you're
this deck is the
aggro, like
best
you need to be
example.
doing.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like it's
Exactly.
just if you're playing aggro, you need to be on curve and just placing threat after threat after threat. It's one of those deal with it kind of how I always feel with mono white is deal with it. Here you go, deal with this. Now deal with this. Deal with this. Can you deal with this? And you it's very glass cannony, but if it's not dealt with, you just get bodied.
Yeah. It's a pretty serious deck. It's been around for what feels like forever now. It's weird because a lot of decks have kind of like gone away from the Faces Haven, but both of these versions are still in on it. So I mean, I think that's
Like
kind of
mono
like,
white, a 3/3 vigilance is still a 3/3 vigilance creature, right?
yeah,
Where in mono green, the whole reason why they were running Faceless Haven was because it could crew Chariot. You could go at turn 5 into Chariot, or was it turn 4? Yeah, turn 4 into Chariot, and then turn 5 you crew Chariot with your Faceless Haven, so you just get it with more damage.
yeah, that's true. I mean, it's still, I guess, like a cheaper version of all the other creature lands. So you know, when you're trying to be aggressive and trying to kill your opponent, that's like what you want to be doing for sure. I just thought it was like really really interesting that they weren't playing that, but a card that I'm happy to see, which is the All Star that I thought was great. It when I saw it was a Ganjo Seed of the Empire. I just always been a huge fan of like lands that do things, and I'm
Yeah.
not surprised. I
The,
myself, I'm not surprised that this is the one that's getting played the most because it kills Goldspan Dragon.
it kills Goldspan, and I think that's why the reasons why a lot of if you're running white, you're probably running 2 to 3 of these lands in your
Yeah,
deck because it just kills Goldspan for free. Not for free, but like it's not going to target Goldspan where it's going to create a treasure, um, and it deals 4 damage. And that's like one of our big things about damage based spells is that it needs to deal 3+ damage.
can't get protection. There's
Yeah.
nothing right now that gives protection to colorless, so you discard this. Not only do they not get a trigger, but they can't protect their gold span from it. So I've definitely seen on a few streams where someone's attacking with their gold, or yeah, their opponent's attacking with a gold span, and then they use the Aganjo, and their opponent tries to like protect it by giving it protection from white, and
Yeah.
that's definitely
Shelter
not
will
gonna
not
work for
protect
you.
you this. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
not gonna work for you. But yeah, what I an innovation that I think is kind of great in these that I'm actually happy to see about from our other set review is Fleeting Spirit. We talked about whether or not the season Hollow Blade could get there, and it's getting there right here in both of these lists.
Yeah.
We've got
It,
two in the sideboard, and for Felipe, and there's one main deck for Merkin here.
Yeah. No, the fleeting spirit is really really good. I think it's a 3/1 threat that it's really hard to interact with and deal with. Um, and definitely, I what I've realized over the course of the weekend too is that it's a great card, but it is not good in an Inquisitor captain like the Coco for mono white or for creatures
Mm-hmm.
in alchemy, because fleeting spirit can eat your graveyard and the captain requires 20 plus in hand, library, and graveyard. And if you keep eating the out of your graveyard, you're not going to have the required amount to keep doing that with the captain. And I've seen it twice now where they're trying to save the spirit and then they go captain and then they whiff. It doesn't like the trigger doesn't go off because there's no creatures in their yard.
Yeah, we saw that on stream twice. When you were
Yeah.
commentating, actually, we saw like they casted game one, I think it was, and they casted game two, and the same thing happened where they got nothing from the Inquisitor Captain. Kind of brutal, honestly, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
your Coco isn't a Coco, it's a no-co. So
Ooh, nice play on words. It's a
yeah,
no-co.
it's a no-co. But yeah, mono white. We've seen this deck. It's a deck. In the meta game, it's here to stay. Uh, you know, playing around it. It's gonna be here for a while. Go ahead and move to our
I'm so excited about this
next
list
deck.
because I've been the decks that came in first and second place. Um, Right now, you remember when we were doing the set list, how high on Smelter I was.
Yeah, it's a good card.
I
I
am
mean,
so
I don't
happy that
remember if we
it
talked about it being in Sacrifice and Historic, right? Like, I think that you could almost make an argument for it, right?
you can a little bit in Historic, because I know there's like Jund food and there's BG food that you can kind of turn into Jund, and um, I was thinking about it being in Historic, but I think Historic is not the place for it. But Alchemy is definitely the place for it. It using the treasure tokens, the blood tokens, the what are they called again? The experimental synthesizers. Being able to sack those for 3/1s that have haste.
And
Kind of
pretty much
brutal.
draw a
Kind
card,
of
right?
brutal.
Like, you
Yeah.
get so much
Kind
value
of
in
brutal.
this is like Rakdos Sacrifice once again is here. There's no cat, there's no oven, but the anvil, the synthesizer, the harvester's just a great card. This is another breakout card of the weekend as well. Kind of just seen it in so many lists where it's just, 2-for-1 type card.
Hmm.
These deck lists essentially are a sanguine brushstroke deck with the Oni Cult Anvil engine,
Yeah, it's like
right?
it literally just this deck pings the Evan Little shit out of you. Like it just one damage, one damage, one damage. Sometimes they might swing in and get three on you with their blood tithe or three on you with their 3/1 haste
Yeah, the
artifact.
token.
But mostly it's just one damage, one damage, one damage, one damage. Three triggers of one damage. And it's just it's like it's one of those, oh my god, like that cat oven deck, you're just getting pinged out and there's nothing you can do about it. You're sitting here just like, just make it stop, make it stop. I think one of the fun facts about this deck here, okay? So our winner from this tournament was Osmandius. Um, they came in and they went 7-1. I'm looking over the record, and they 2-0'd everyone they came up against. They only lost one game, and that was against Honey Milk, which was the person that came into second place. So they faced them in round one they were their first matchup, and Aussie won 2-1. From that point on, Aussie 2-0'd Jessica Hanada, 2-0'd Leslie Agro, 2-0'd Grixis, 2-0'd Bant, 2-0'd Mono Red, 2-0'd Mono White, and then 2-0'd Honey Milk again in the finals. Or not again, I should say, but faced Honey Milk again in the finals and then 2-0'd them. That just goes to show like how powerful this deck can be.
Yeah, I actually think that this deck has a lot of game, and I also don't think that this is a deck you can just pick up. I feel like, there's definitely a lot of people that can play these decks to their most efficiency because you have to be so precise in your plays. Like the best example is of how many chump blocks there were in the top 8
Mm-hmm.
to win the game, right? Like you have to
Just
be
stay alive. Just
exact
stay
in
alive.
certain sacrifices, managing your resources pretty much. Like, once like you get that second anvil out and you're making 2 tokens a turn, it starts to get out of control pretty quick because you're gaining a couple life, you're
Yeah,
draining
and
your
you're just
opponent.
you're just counting the entire match. It's like, okay, that's one damage, right? This is three damage, all right? This is four damage. Okay, I can get in for one damage here, and then I can sack this. That's going to do one damage, and blah 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 blah. You're constantly doing the math, and that's one thing too. Like in historic, there's the BG food deck that it's all about incremental value, like how much one damage can I do, and blah 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 blah. And this is the reason why a lot of these decks go to time, because there's so much thought process into it.
I mean, it's crazy because another thing that you could call this deck is a deadly dispute deck. Like I feel like deadly dispute has been one of the most impactful commons in a very long time, right?
Hmm.
Like it's just if you're playing black, that's almost where your deck starts is deadly dispute.
Yeah, and like the Deadly Dispute, it being able to draw you two cards and make a treasure, it's just so good. You just got to sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and you already want in a deck that already wants to sacrifice artifacts. Like it's just the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and once again, another thing that we're seeing here is just one of the Kamigawa lands, these legendary lands. We have one Sukenzen and one Takanuma, which, I mean, it's interesting that we're still only doing one of those, but we actually saw these cards on stream do some work, right? Get some blocks in, kill some planeswalkers. Takanuma can potentially just get you something really good back, like a Blood Tithe Harvester. Can get back some of your planeswalkers. Just a great card. Like, I'm really happy to see these lands. I feel like we're gonna see them in their whole existence in Standard and Alchemy, and you may even see some of them in Historic, just because just the ability to have abilities on lands is just a great thing. You just sometimes it just never feels like you run out of gas, and you never run out of options because of things like that.
Hmm.
The MDFCs definitely taught us that as well.
Well, like I said, like I was saying, like every card needs to do more than one thing, and the fact that your lands are now spells are just that much more powerful.
Yeah, I think like the most interesting card in the sideboard for me is the Cemetery Gatekeeper, which we didn't really get to see too much during the event, but it's interesting that they're playing four of them. I mean, it's not really like a common card that you see too often in sideboard.
Hmm. I would have loved to seen it, and I if you watched the video before with myself and John Likes Games in the top 8, we were talking about the cemetery being this is the runes card because you exile a rune and now runes can't just go off because they're going to take 2 damage per rune they play.
Ah, good point. I didn't even cross my head there. That's actually really, really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
And they're also playing the three Duresses, which of course we just got done talking about. How awesome Duress was earlier. Couple Infernal Grass. Got
Hmm.
the Graveyard Trespassers, couple Sorens, one Power Word Go, one Blood Chief Thirst for the winning deck list here. Also another card that I think is interesting that we saw a lot of, that it's kind of cool that in the right place these creature lands are kind of interchangeable. And we see that here with the Den of the Bugbear. I feel like we saw Den of the Bugbear quite a lot on stream today.
Hmm. Yeah,
She's been
yeah,
quite a
we
lot on
did.
stream on Sunday, but it's a card that I feel like wasn't played as
Creature
much
lands are
beforehand.
on themselves are just so powerful because they're so hard to interact with if you don't have instant speed removal. Cards like the White Dragon that can fly over you, Den of the Bugbear creating another body that you have to deal with, Hive being a menace threat, Crawling Barrens being able to pump itself up and keep hitting you. Even Faceless Haven, it's still in Alchemy being a 3/3 vigilant attacker can really still do some damage to you.
That's all creature types. Like, being all creature types is actually, I feel
Yeah,
like, a lot more
it's
relevant in this alchemy.
mhm. Like it's one of those those creature lands are just so powerful. I think, and honestly, I think the weakest one is Lair, and even Lair is still pretty good. And our breakout card has to be the Oni Cult Anvil. This card has been an absolute house throughout the entire tournament. It's just a threat when it comes down. It requires to be removed of, and or you're just looking for it. And it's just a incremental 1 ping damage that gains you life. It's gonna make a body for you. This body can be sacked for treasures, can be sacked for cards. This card's a menace. It's just a menace.
Yeah, it's just like, this is the reason why the Rakdos Sacrifice decks exist. This is the engine in itself. Essentially, you sacrifice, you deal damage, you gain life, you even make creatures, things that are artifacts themselves to sacrifice later. Like, this card is really, really strong. I mean, if it didn't have that once per turn clause on it, this card would go off pretty quick. But even just as is, I mean, it's good enough, to make a competitive deck that took down an event this on March 13th. Like, it's crazy how incremental value is so important in Magic, right? Like, you would think that like, I feel like this is almost more of like a now type Magic. Like, back in the day, I feel like these cards were kind of like overlooked maybe a little bit, but
Hmm.
Now,
I
like
find it, yeah, I definitely find it really funny when it's just like that one, like when you're like, oh yeah, it's just one damage. It's just one damage. It's
one
just one
damage and
damage.
a 1/1.
And you're like, wait a minute, I was at 20 life a couple turns ago. Why am I at 10? Okay, wait a minute. I'm at 3 life. I need. How can I gain life here? And then you're just dead, and you're like, how did this happen? And then you look over the opponent's board, like, oh, they had two anvils, a meat hook massacre, and a blood artist, and all these one damages become 5 damages, become 6 damages. You're just, and then it gets to the point where they go so wide where you can't even board wipe them because then meat hook will kill you. It's one of those things where just that one damage of incremental is just it's crazy valuable.
Yeah, I mean, when you're at 15 staring the stack down, you feel like you're on a 2-turn clock. You're
Yeah.
literally like, what do I need to kill? What, where can I gain life? Like, how can I deal with this? Because one, my opponent isn't even playing any, like, really what seems like important cards, right? You're like, oh, they just got some tokens and, synthesizer out. They're not really doing anything. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, before you know it, you're at 9 life. You're staring down like 3 or 4 tokens and you're wondering what happened to the game, right? Like
That
it
being
goes away
said,
pretty quick.
farewell would have eaten this deck alive.
Definitely farewell, is a card that I think going forward is definitely still, right place in the meta. I mean, it gets rid of everything, gets rid of the graveyard, artifacts, enchantments, creatures. Just the only thing it doesn't deal with is planeswalkers, but pretty much dealing with everything else is
Yeah, exiling everything is
relevant.
very powerful,
Yeah,
and it's really weird that we barely seen that card almost all tournament. I think there's only 4 lists that were actually running farewell.
definitely. It's mostly in those Hinata lists, but I think we only had one Jeskai deck in
So
the
I think we
top
had
eight.
two. One of them in the top eight. No, no, no. I don't think we had them anyone in the
Yeah, we
top
didn't. So we
eight.
didn't have any
There was one
Jeskai.
in the PT top eight,
That's right. Yeah,
but
there's one in the
none of them
PT
made
top
it.
eight, and we didn't have any. Which to me, I mean, that's another deck that I'm actually really surprised nobody played.
Yeah. Hmm.
Like the
I think it's I myself. You already know me. I preach to the choir. I think Jeskai Hinata Opus is just so
only
powerful,
two
and
decks. Here, say 2 decks and combined record 0-3.
I know. Don't remind me. I'm gonna keep here and I'm gonna keep testing it, but it's one of those decks. But here we are with our breakout card, it being the Omnicult Anvil. This card's a host. We know it. It's a menace. I think we're gonna be dealing with this card for
Its
a lot of metas
existence.
to
I think that
come.
this card has the potential to be played in historic in the oven deck more. Just
Yeah.
because it really does do everything you want to do. You can sack food. You make the 1/1. The 1/1 turns back into a food through the oven, and then you kind of can just keep that going, right?
You can kind of keep looping, yeah. So I guess like you sacrifice a food, get an artifact, then you sacrifice that artifact to get a food. Yeah, I mean it can chain pretty good, and it
Yeah, it's
goes right
pretty
in that
interesting.
Loris build. I mean, I guess you'd have to go Jund versus just
Black
BG.
green. Yeah. Yeah, it does fit into with Luris too, which is still legal in historic. That's a card. But yeah, breakout card, Oni Colt Anvil, fantastic card. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the metagame breakdown for March 13th's Slice of Alchemy. Thanks again to HearSayTTV for joining me. You can find all their information below in the description. As always, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And as always, stay cheesy.